Hello and welcome to the Gerety Talks. My name is Lucia Ungai. I am the co-founder of the Gerety Awards, which is a global creative prize that is redefining the standard to which advertising has been traditionally held. Named for Francis Gerety, the copywriter who in 1948 coined the slogan, "A diamond is forever," Gerety Awards marks the first time an international jury has been brought together to select the best in advertising, all advertising and not just advertising made for women, through the female lens. Just like the awards, the Gerety Talks will put some of the creative industry's change makers in the spotlight with the aim to drive progress within the industry in a global scale. Today, I'm very happy to have T. Uglow as a guest. Hi, T. Thanks for joining us. She is a creative director for Google Creative Labs in Sydney. She works with cultural and creative organizations around the world, exploring the space between technology and the arts and what can happen when they intersect. She has written books. She was awarded a Peabody for digital storytelling and has a TED Talk that has more than 1.7 million views. I had to update that because last time it was 1.6. And she mentors queer, BAME, female and other intersectional creators and coders, and she likes pop physics, behavioral psychology, and shopping. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. And also, more importantly, you were part of the Gerety Awards jury last year. The Gerety Awards jury. Super.
Yes, I think I wasn't. Yes, I'm actually just. I've ever since Joe first got in touch with me to suggest it, I've been a big fan and a huge supporter of the Gerety Awards. I think it's brilliant. Likes it.
Thank you. So you launched a new book this year,
Yes,
which is called Loud and Proud, and it's an inspirational collection of speeches from the LGBTQ plus community and its allies that have changed our world and the conversation. So how did you come up with the idea of writing it, and why?
These things are often a combination of things. I'm always talking to people generally, and I was talking to a publisher who is an old friend of mine, and we were talking about sort of those kind of books. I think there's a lot of so it was partly they suggested it. They said, "Do you want to write this book?" And I was like, and I went away and thought about it. And then I think I really decided I wanted to write it when I was already writing it. Do you know what that's like sometimes?
Yeah.
Someone asks you to do something and you don't think it's interesting until you start to do it, and then you go, "Oh my God, this is epic." So I had this kind of wonderful experience of having to go and research speeches, like something which we see less and less from but real speeches, that not just political speeches and are not really just TED Talks, but people who have gone into situations with only their voice and their ideas, and normally their ideas are like genuinely dangerous. Like it is a danger to them. And obviously people have been kind of, well, basically it just starts for and then it became this really interesting thing, which is that like I'm queer, and I always sort of have believed that like it's something of a trope, but just the idea that gay rights started in Stonewall in the 60s and 70s, and really quickly I worked out that that's not true at all. It started in Germany in the 19th century. Like that's where gay rights starts. Like that's where the first people, the first gay men, the first gay women stand up and speak on behalf of themselves. And you see this cyclical thing happening where again and again minorities have to stand up for themselves and speak out. And because you know we're a minority, we're really not, it's not registered very much. I think it's quite telling that German society, which has got a great tradition for recording things, is where we get the early records of the queer community, and that in itself is just wonderful. So it's been this just kind of fascinating journey where you meet all these people that we do know, like how we tell the stories of Harvey Milks and so forth, And then you meet all these people who we don't know, who are really important. But you only really know that when you get into the speeches, because you can't hide the fact that who's standing up, who's really there, who's doing it. Your sort of celebrity standard doesn't really apply. And it was quite interesting because towards the end it was like, can we have some more celebrities possibly in the book, because we've got to sell a book. So it was a lovely journey, and it was great opportunity. And for me, it was fascinating, and it hit one of the reasons why I was talking to my developers the other day, and we were talking about projects and why we do anything. And one of the things was that there has to be something significant to it beyond it in itself. It has to be a proxy for ideas. A project has to be a proxy for something significant that you want to say, because then you can kind of use anything as a vessel, as a Trojan horse, a Trojan for your ideas, because that's what we are. So it was really great like that. It was really fascinating, and I wish I'd had more opportunity to travel around and talk about it, but it's been a very funny year like that. So
yeah, I saw on your website you had like this tour, and everything had to be canceled, unfortunately.
yeah, it was another year of, it's been really interesting. I think it's been fascinating for everyone, but I know you wanted to ask about it. But yeah, being stationary has been quite hard for me.
And how did you choose the characters that were featured in the book? Did you know in the beginning, or?
Oh no, I didn't know most of them in the beginning. I think a lot of it came out of researching. A lot of it came out of trying to, you think it would be fairly straightforward to find important or beautiful speeches by gay people. But minorities are not normally listened to, let alone recorded. So our speeches are not heard until they're not necessary. So there were lots of speeches by gay people, but we don't know that they were gay, and they're certainly not on gay issues. There are lots of speeches by people. Wow. So really, it's kind of within the last 150 years, and it was a journey of. It was a research journey. I think the research is always almost as much fun as putting the thing together. It's like you just sort of discovering these strange people, and then having to argue for strange people. People like me, who had completely normal lives in lots of other ways, but at the same time were doing these kind of activism things, and or people who were completely caught up in it. And it's got, sort of regular the strange people over here and the regular people over here, like, Obama or Elton John, or like people who've done a lot for the movement. There's obviously a lot of Americans in there because they're good at that stuff, and also because the Americans have led in the second half of the 20th century. They did lead the world really in promoting and enabling, and then have fallen away rather. Actually, maybe they haven't. Maybe they're just the loudest. I think they have always had the loudest fight. If you look at legislation around the world, it has moved at a glacial, but it has eddied, and different places at different times have moved faster and slower. And it's very, very interesting to see how outdated legislation can become. Like in the UK, the legislation around the Gender Reform Act, which was in 2004, was genuinely years ahead of its time, and really remarkable when the Blair government introduced it, but was out of date and is out of date now, when we're trying to, and actually we're facing this extraordinary kind of pushback on trying to update laws to reflect how society has changed in 20 years. So it's fascinating. And instead of which you're having this huge fight about a piece of legislation that literally seems like no one has any idea what they're fighting about, or what they're fighting against. They're fighting against some kind of cultural thing that they're uncomfortable about, and actually we're fighting in search of the ability to get our passport without having to have a board of doctors and officials tell you. So those sorts of things. It's those sorts of people. And seeing how they got whitewashed out of out of society or out of their movements. Rustin Baynard Rustin, thank you. Baynard Rustin, who's is my favourite like that, who sort of was the right-hand man to Martin Luther King, and people haven't heard of more because he was gay, and known to be gay, and was targeted by the FBI because he was gay. And so he's kind of gently moved from the civil rights movement just to this other place. It's full of people like that. It's really sad. It's a really sad book, but it's also quite empowering as well, because it shows why we do the things. We do a little bit and a little bit, and we chip away, because that's how progress happens.
And what feedback did you have from your readers so far?
Oh, it was very nice. It's a funny thing to do. It's like, it's a funny thing to do. It's not like doing things online. There's a very curious thing about making an actual physical book and putting it out into the world, and then not being able to follow it up. So not being able to travel around the world, not being able to see people, not being able to ask what they thought. And whenever you ask what people think and they know you made it, they're always really nice. So you can't trust that at all. It's the same with your ads or your projects or your work. It's like, never trust anyone who's actually looking at you when they tell you what they think. I think that it's had some really positive responses online, and I think there's a lot about sort of the things that I've really liked is when people realise that this is not a Christmas present for their gay friends. Their gay friends know this. Then the queer community. Well, it's informational, but it's not kind of like substantially significant. What it's really meant for is a coffee table book for straight people who don't know this, who don't know our history, who haven't heard these journeys, don't understand how rich and complex and difficult it is, who think that gay rights is summed up by a flag or by drag queens in glitter, or by, I don't know, whatever vision, whatever like sort of small way they have created, or Hollywood. These are not the people that should be telling our stories. So that's who it's for, and that's going to be really difficult, because I think that's what I wanted to go out and tell people. I'd really love to know what they think. My friends are lovely, but that's what friends are for. They're meant to be lovely.
And talking about flag, I read in an article that since 2016, the transgender pride flag was the most requested emoji after the gay pride flag. And it finally became an emoji this year. And I read you were involved in the process of this happening. So how did that process, and what other people or organizations did you partner with for this to happen?
It was a really long process. Yes, it took 4 years.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it didn't take 4 years. I mean, it did literally took 4 years, but you have every year you can submit an application. It's actually completely open and anyone can submit an application. That's what they mean by most requested. People put petitions up and say, we should have this. And it's one of those things where actually that doesn't do anything, because it's an open process. You have to submit an application. And then, just like with many things which are seemingly open, it's actually quite difficult, because you have to then speak the right language. It's like a legal process where you have to basically create not just or a coding thing where you have to not just submit it, but it has to be submitted the right way, and it has to be literally formatted the right way, and all of these sorts of things which took at least a year. The first year we tried, and we just made a very strong kind of like, of course we need it. And then the second year was like going, oh right, so you didn't even look at it because it's basically we hadn't done it in the right font, or we certainly hadn't done it the way they wanted it done. And then the third year, and then this wonderful group from, and it's not ever been, there haven't been any organizations, no organizations been involved. A wonderful man called Ted Etienne and Bianca and gosh, I forget everyone's names. There are about 4 or 5 people who around the world, part of different trans orgs, apart from Ted actually, who's just a doctor. He's just really cool. He's like a doctor in oh, is he New York or Washington or like he's just an advocate and an ally, and it kind of demonstrated how powerful it is to have an ally as a kind of point person. So we didn't have any insiders until a bit later. Then in the UK, there was a group called Claws Out for Trans, which was, and they got Charlie Craggs, who's a friend of mine in the UK, to kind of spearhead their campaign, so that was really easy for us all to hook up. And they did really powerful kind of PR-y stuff, which technically just kind of annoyed annoyed them over in the committee, but was also really useful because it was, as you say, like the reason you know that it's the most demanded is because of Charlie's video and because of Claude's Up Trans. And like they did a kind of a pressure campaign, but that pressure campaign didn't have a point of pressure because there is no point of pressure. There's no one whose job it is to choose the emojis. It's not how it works. We all choose them, and then you realize that it's a complex process of choosing. And the people who actually decide which of the many submissions will be included are a board called the Unicode board. And they it's an open thing, anyone can join, but there's a wonderful documentary on it actually, or there's a couple of wonderful documentaries. I prefer the one that I'm in, but which is by a Dutch documentary maker, and is something like Beyond the Emoji, which really does pick apart how absurd it is. I didn't even realize that industries lobbied and paid lobbyists to get emojis.
To get emojis done. Oh, wow.
Yeah, like, and then I was watching the film and I was like, why an industry are paying these people to have an emoji? Okay, how extraordinary. So yeah, we were like a bit more grassroots than that, but we did have the advantage of like having friends at Google and Facebook and Twitter and Microsoft, across the industry. So I've been in the industry for 13 years. So eventually there was a lot of internal pressure as well, and internally, actually, the guys got in touch with me. I think I'm not sure whether I ever quite reached the right people, but people like Jennifer Daniels and who really pushed us over the line by saying, right, they need this research, they need these details, they need to show these examples, and they literally kind of gave us. It's like having a mentor trying to teach you how to write your CV.
Knowing how to present the project so that it went
how to apply and what data they needed it, and it just sort of helped that actually we've been in the middle of a very visible sort of war online for the last 4 years. So actually there was quite a lot of representation, and it was I don't think in the end too hard for them to go, but it opens lots of questions about why other groups shouldn't have flags, because it does. It really does open those questions. And then there's a big question for them about whether you should have emojis that are representative of states or countries or religions, or like what like something that started off quite simple, if it's not going to expand to include everyone, is by its nature exclusive. So why would you want an exclusive language? And that was my point in the beginning, was like, why would you want a language that excludes an entire demographic so that we have literally no way of saying who we are? It seemed really unfair, but I think that follows for lots of people. So it'd be interesting to see what happens next. I mean, at the moment they're busy unpacking it so that you can do lots of things to it yourself, but I'm not sure how that will evolve.
And I read once in a conference in China that you use Google Translate to find out what title they had used to present you in Chinese. And the result was experimental person in charge.
Yeah.
I like that.
I know, I really like that. I'm not really sure whether that was their translation or our translation of what they translated. So that's the problem with translation. It's rather fun when you put an English thing into Chinese and then get it out again in English, and you're like, okay, that's probably shouldn't work like that. But it was, I use that title all the time, except that I'm not really in charge anymore. But yes, creative person, or experimental person in charge, yes. I still like it, but I'm not in charge anymore, so that's good. I think I'd always thought it was rather funny because I never really felt very in charge.
And what things have you been experimenting with lately? And any special ones during the lockdown that we used to, well,
yeah, we did a lot of really interesting things with arts orgs early on about how, especially theatre, I've got a great sort of passion for theatre, and the idea of performance and how we all perform all the time. And obviously we've started performing in this through this medium a lot more. And I think people have, I don't know, I have no idea whether people watch more. It's sort of really weird. I keep telling my children not to watch so much television. Or not to have screens, and at the same time spend my entire life looking at screens all day, 2-3 screens at a time. So it's quite, I wonder how broken it is. And I do spend a lot of time looking at what we do and going, as everyone should, like, why isn't this as good as it should be? I mean, what would we need to do to make it better? So we get back to the things that I think matter, like spatialization of sound. I'm very obsessed with sound, you know that. Like,
yeah, I
we've
read
been
that.
doing something about, and I'm very oversensitive. It's a neurodiversity thing, really. And it's why neurodiverse people are helpful, because they have odd things that don't bother other people. But I'm very interested in sound and how much sound we interpret in our daily lives, and how much information we get through sound. And then why, when we are packing so much information onto our tiny devices, do we have such a kind of primitive approach to sound at a computer level? So a lot of the projects we've been doing over the last few years have been looking at how you unpack sound and you make it spatial. So, for example, I think with meetings, one of the things that's fascinating is when you can get multi-streams of audio, which is almost less important than seeing people, and have multiple streams of audio which can be binaurally placed around you, so that you can actually address people and they can address you, and that can kind of change the information. It's very simple if you think about it. I mean, if you can place people in a relational, or you can place all of their audio in a relational way, that's what you have in a meeting room. All of these things that we take for granted in reality, and we don't, we think computers are so clever, but they can't do that. They don't know which way they're facing or where they are. And even when you program them, they are still not as good as you want them to be at this kind of finding their way around. And it's partly because of the way we write programs, because we sit still and stationary as we write the programs. We have never taken the computers out into our world in the way that we are now. And so when you build in an environment, you tend to build, just as you have bias towards your internal thoughts and beliefs, you also have biases towards your physical state. There's all these ways in which we use the language of the physical world, the real world, to describe the technology we're using, and yet we don't actually kind of, I think, respect or operate in the real world. So it's another one of these ones where, unless you know the languages, you don't get to play you don't get to play the game. It's like the law is the same. You know, we code, we encrypt, we hide the power, so you can see it, you know it exists. The church is another one. Liturgy, you know, there's a reason why the Bible only got translated into common speak, whatever it was, 400 years ago. What, 2,000-year-old Christian church? Yeah. Took 3/4 of their lifespan to translate it into English and Spanish, and interesting. I wonder why. And they kill the people who do. So, you know, you can see that. Thankfully, we're not at a point where people who try and turn code into human speak are killed yet. But I'm not sure how popular they are when they do unleash, in a way, like the ability for people to use technology. So sound is one thing. People using their own language to tell computers what to do is another thing. I'm really interested in the idea that video is basically just a big website with lots of pictures, because that's what it is. And once we were sort of acknowledged that that's what a video is, it's just lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures in a sequence. And most of those pictures are the same, right? And then it's a load of words, either to describe what the picture is of, which again doesn't change. If it's a picture like this, it's pretty much the same. And then the words that I say, which are increasingly comprehensible to a computer. And so once you get to that point, you've basically got a kind of temporal pages. And if you can search text and you can search images, then why can't you search videos in the same way? So we've been doing lots of experiments around that, because that changes a lot of things as well. It's very challenging. Basically, my job at the moment is to look at all the things that we use and go, what would it be if it was better? And I'm not like I'm building them, I'm just kind of pointing stuff out and going, well, this doesn't work, even when it's like Chrome.
And I read also that your job has a lot of anticipating what is going to be the future like, and given how this year has been, that we know nothing about the pandemic and everything that's happening, has that made you change your way of seeing things, or?
Oh no, I think that it's been exactly the opposite. It's been a really good reminder that I don't know. You know, I can wander around telling people to be comfortable not knowing what's going to happen, and forget sometimes that I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, people do tend to rely on things an awful lot, and I have had moments, you know, if you're trans and autistic, and you have these sort of weird things in your life where you go, oh right, and you have to reevaluate your life from scratch. You have to look at everything that's happened, and you have to go, and it's like, it's really useful because it reminds you that you make the world, you make the journey that you're on, you invent the story. It's just a narrative, and it's a narrative you tell yourself, but we project that narrative into the future, which is, if my narrative is true and fair, then this should happen, and I will work to make this happen. And you're not writing that in a vacuum. You don't get to say what's going to happen. So it's been quite useful like that, because at the same time, I think that we've all had opportunities to behave or live differently. I mean, it's been really difficult, and it is really difficult. If you have had a life where you are used to the freedoms that most of the people watching this, I would imagine, are very used to, then this sort of level of restriction, or this level of like solitude, or these you know, or any of the kind of depredations of 2020, of which there have been many, they are all really challenging. Like, if your business has changed, and if it goes back to being what it was, like, what does that say? I keep thinking this. It's like when the global economy grinds to a stop, and you don't think that's a good moment to try and like there's an essential need to keep things going as they were, when we know how bad that is.
Do you think that will change? Or that should
I think it
change,
will
at least?
fundamentally change.
Yeah.
I think it will fundamentally change. I don't think people are going back to the office. I don't think people are going back into working. I cannot imagine a world where everyone trundles into work at 9 o'clock in the morning. I can't. I mean, for disabled communities have been trying to point out that we can work from home for years and years. Now that we're over the great toilet roll crisis, we are seeing that we can. We really can work from home. We can do this. We've got this, and we can work at similar or higher levels of productivity. So it is very, it would be really sad if we are unable to grasp that this is just this and other major things. We stopped the world for the pandemic, but we won't stop the world for the environment, and I do not understand that. So I think there was a moment where you go, oh, if we have to stop the world, we have to stop the world. Like, otherwise we're going to lose the world. It's like, it's not like the pandemic. It's like, well, I mean, like what There's been lots of very interesting things about whether Donald Trump would be in more trouble if it were only a few people who had died from COVID. Because actually, the second it gets to whatever it is, 225,000 people and rising, we aren't able to deal with that. You know, another time when, do you know another time, just, I'm very curious, do you know another time when 250,000 people died in a natural disaster that you can think of?
No.
No? Okay, because I think it's really interesting that we don't. But you do remember like Twin Towers and like how many people died there, or like the Paris, yeah, or the Charlie Hebdo things, or these things which are so. 250,000 people died in the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, 2000, what? 2005. And my help, my fact checker over here. And it was I sort of, not that I don't think anyone should forget that, but we all have. 15 years ago, 250,000 people died in 24 hours, and we don't remember. So I think it's really interesting when you have these huge things, which is that the human brain can't deal with that. And I think it's the same thing is happening now. It's like we're just gonna ignore all of it and go back. And when it comes to climate change, we will ignore it because we can't cope with it. It's not an individual problem. It's a species problem. It's like we can't, if we can't do it, if we've got like good examples of how that's not possible, it's really challenging to see how we will. But I think that's the big thing that everyone should really probably be focused on. It's like, yeah, I know we've dealt with the pandemic, and you've had a really good taste of how society can stop on a dime. We can lock an entire society down. We can absolutely take that. We can somehow, you know, and also just this ability to survive on such a restricted diet of everything. Freedom, movement, air travel. Really? So, and we've found ways, we've innovated, we've been creative. We are very creative when we're given those restraints. So I think that it's really time. The main thing to remember is like that's not the big problem. It's really not. I mean, I know it's awful, but it's nothing. But I don't know. So I'm really curious to see whether we can act with equal concern for our children's children as we do for our parents and grandparents.
And you also mentioned in an interview the importance of listening to what communities have to say in spaces like Twitter and hashtags and follow. What hashtags have you been interested in lately, or who are you following? What new people are you following?
Oh, I'm terrible at the moment. You know what? The last 3 months have been almost entirely consumed by the American elections. So one of the other things that on those things that are interesting, and you're like, I've been very interested in Google spreadsheets. I'm a great spreadsheet person. I know, geeky. But I am, and I find it really curious because again, it's like it's a website thing. Maybe it's like when I started, websites were designed on tables, right? I don't know if you remember that. Like everything was a table, TDs, TRs, and rows and columns and things. It was designed like that. So in order to design it, you had to build it in that way. I mean, it was awful, but that's how it was. And it has sort of stayed with me ever since that all information can be structured in a table, because it can. And we've had a really interesting thing recently where I was suddenly looking at the Google Sheets and realizing quite how powerful they are. They've slowly over the years got more powerful until they're basically like a little mini web server, but without any. So when Tim Berners-Lee came along and proposed the hypertext markup language and which became the World Wide Web, which was only, again, 25 years ago. Its power was that it took databases which were on these servers and then created a language to allow people to see it. So I'm really interested that we have the databases on the cloud, but we have all these databases which we use every day. We've got a way of putting information into them, which is that we either type it or we use Google Forms or we use forms, or so we've got all of the ways of building these databases and not using them. So the things I've been following recently have been to do with the American election and to do with SQL servers. And those are really, really geeky and horrible. But so one, I'm embarrassed to tell you, it's basically like a coding stuff. Not even cool coding stuff, really, really lame, geeky. Not lame and geeky. I mean, I think all powerful, but it's like it's not complicated. It's just we make it complicated. So I'm really interested into how to fix it. So I made a beautiful tracking thing for the American elections, because beautiful to me, very annoying to my girlfriend, because it sucks up all my time as I follow all of the different polls and the different data and the different races, and I wanted it all presented in a way that I wanted, and which I think has been called a dashboard, but really it's just a website. But it's a website where I scrape a lot of stuff from other websites using sheets, and then I create. It's just a website. So learning how to do those things has been like, again, it's been like being a beginner at loads of stuff. But like, how do I do this?
And there's another project, Editions at Play, that explores what a digital book might be, one which makes use of the dynamic properties of the web. And the quote is, we want to create books that are powered by the magic of the internet. What does that mean exactly?
It means that we can have, again, that we're rather restricted when we make things, the form which we use informs the way we make it, right? If you have designed books, then the idea that you wouldn't be as fascinated in the different potentials of the stock, or the different sort of or fonts, or sort of spot prints, or the move from so I grew up in a time where we moved from film to digital to plate. So this is back when you had litho printing. Rather, I don't even know whether it's all digital now. I assume there's still offset printing, and but we would have spot inks on. You must remember all this stuff. I mean, it's not that old. It's like, am I that old? I can't be that old. But my early work again was like in magazine printing, and I was fascinated by the paper because that's the technology. Move that we were making from digital to print, and I think that everyone should always be fascinated in the edge of the technologies that they're using, and a book in a lot of ways is not a vessel or media form that has moved much, but I've always been interested in it as a formal thing. So I studied book art at university, and which is, as I've been trying to explain to someone, not art books or making books that look beautiful, but books that are themselves the work, and it's through the form of pages. So I was always very interested in that, and I did that normal thing of saying, what happens to this when it's online? How do we make a book that uses the fact that it could be online, that the words can change? They can change depending on the weather or the date, or so many games now. I mean, we're playing Animal Crossing a lot, which knows whether it's raining outside and what the weather's like and what time of day it is, and so it is in Animal Crossing. So which we love, and I'm like, why don't books do that? Why can't the book do that? If a website knows, honestly, websites on our phone appear to know what we're just talking to each other about at the moment. So why can't a book that I'm reading know that? If it's good, if you want to let the book know, like, it can really inform you. So we did do a ghost book, which kind of took all of that information and made a ghost story more scary. Or we have books which change as you read them, or go back and forward in time, or books that are inspired by, I mean, this is for me has been very much inspired by, again, the Trump presidency and American politics, where you have all of these very, very multi-dimensional perspective on the same story. So you can have a narrative that's told from lots of different perspectives. And just like we do moving through life, we don't really consciously stop and choose very often. I mean, increasingly, I know I choose to get my news from CNN and NBC, but I keep Fox up there if I want to know, or I keep the BBC there because I figure they'll give me a slightly kind of more dry, impartial version. I mean, but quite often the whole story, the narrative itself, is an exercise in partisanship. These truths are either true or untrue, entirely depending on there's not a middle ground which is like, this is the truth. There's no truth to it. And so I think it's wonderful when you can start doing stories like that. So you could do it. I mean, anyway, that's basically the principle of the thing. So there are lots of those different examples. We did about 9 or 10 in the end. And through it all, I have this kind of overwhelming thing about value, about what makes digital objects valuable. Like, how is it that a painting can be worth something and a website cannot? Like, if a painting is, or a concept work or anything, we don't value paint by the yard. We don't know, or we do actually value painting by the yard. If you are getting someone into paint, they will quote on the general meterage. But if you are buying a painting, that's not how that works. Otherwise, all paintings would be equal, because all paintings are equal. We ascribe value to it because it's art, right? And it's the same with projects on the web, by artists on the web. It's like, why do these things not have value? So that underpinned the whole thing. So lots of little experiments on value, but I won't go on because it's going to be very dull. Yeah, I can talk a lot about notions of like how society creates and establishes a kind of concepts of economic or tangible value for digital objects, really, for things which are non-tangible, for things which you can't give to someone and say, this is the only version. I can't show you my socks. This is the only version of this hairbrush in the world, and therefore it's rare and scarce, and it brushed my hair, therefore it's worth much more than this other hairbrush which looks similar but hasn't brushed my hair.
It also depends on who's...
I was about to do that with a sock, and I was like, no, that's really not cool.
It depends also maybe of who's looking at the brush or what the value that brush has.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So those things of provenance, like what you're just describing, is, I think, incredibly significant. And when we get to talking about non-tangible artifacts, we place value in so many non-tangible artifacts, and yet because I think because actually the cultural institutions and the organizations that are opinion informers and gatekeepers of cultural value remain disinclined to ascribe cultural value to work that they feel falls outside of the arts, and so therefore is not valuable. And it's very peculiar, and unfortunately when something is not valuable, that means that the economy around it is not valuable, and if the economy around something is not valuable, i.e. you can't earn money, it is very hard to persuade people who have intelligence and intellect to pursue that. It has to be a thing of passion alone, and especially when there are actually costs to creating work, as there are with everything. It means you end up with a sort of the unfortunate side effect that the people making the work are the people who can afford to make the work, which, as we see in Western culture, is one of the reasons why everything's done by white men. I mean, it's like it's an exercise in like cultural capital. Who's got the time? This is basic economics. It's not that men are better at making music. It's just that they're the only people who are allowed the time to do that. They're afforded it. It's an indulgence on behalf of society. You can guarantee if Beethoven had been born into a subsistence economy, he would not have been a musician. He'd have been a farmer because they'd have needed him. I mean, I don't think that's an arguable point. Is that a contestable point? I think that's pretty straightforward. Anyway, so I think that digital arts is in a similar sort of state where it's not afforded that value. See, starting on value, it's a big problem. I really shouldn't talk about value at all. What? Sorry.
Because I know you also are very fond of non-linear narratives, and I wonder if you read a book from one of my favorite Argentinian writers that's called Julio Cortázar. It's a book from 1963 called Hopscotch, and it's a novel that can be read either following the sequence of the chapters chronologically or by hopscotching through the entire set of the 155 chapters according to a table of instructions that the author wrote. It was very, very disruptive at that moment, and I think you might like it. So I just wondered if you knew about it and if you ever...
I actually didn't know about it. So I do know about it, and I'd slightly misplaced it in my lineage, which is really sad because I thought it was a bit later. But there was a book in 1961, which is like the most radical of these, I think, called Composition Number 1, which is just a 270-page book, which they've just taken the spine off, and it can be read in any, and it literally, I'm moving, so all of my books are gone, which is very difficult. It's like very sharp. It's very hard. They're all in boxes. And I think I'm now out of focus, but. Yeah, there's a book called Composition Number 1, which is by a French author in 1961, and it's not very good. I mean, it's not a good literary exercise. I'm out of focus. Don't like being out of focus. Or maybe it's good for me. Maybe it makes me look soft and young-skinned. But there's a book which is exactly that. So you can go in any order. And then Hopscotch, which I thought was much later, is like a couple of years later, and is the same sort of idea, but like a kind of middle ground, where I think they've seen Composition Number 1 and gone, this is unintelligible, and it's rubbish. And it's much better. So this is a much better book, but it retains some elements of the formal structure in that you can read it as a kind of two-part, whatever it is. It's sort of 20-chapter normal book. And then there's all of these extra bits, which in a way we have, you see again in things like Tolkien or fantasy writers often write into an additional scale of a kind of backstory, or we see this in online with a lot of popular TV shows or games, right down to the idea that you get fan fiction. So yeah, that's a really interesting form where you get those, and I think it works really well online because people then can pursue that, but we don't really see it we don't really see it formalized. We don't see it as a kind of formal exercise. It's like when the characters in a TV show start to have their own Twitter handles, and when things that are happening in the real world start to affect the narrative in what is a quasi-linear thing, and when you start watching a show, and it doesn't really matter when you start watching it, because their narrative will carry on. But like online, there is kind of back and forth. When we talk about, I love listening to, I mean, again, I'm very influenced by the United States at the moment because the election's just coming up. But when they've been struggling to find a way to go, like, Planet Earth or Reality One, and then Trump's reality back in Reality One. And they've struck on this lovely thing where they say, I know, Trump's fantastical universe. And I guess you can't remember the phrase they use, but it's basically the Marvel universe. And it's just all of these kind of like conservatives, like they've clearly never heard of the Marvel universe, or they don't understand that the Marvel universe is this kind of strange thing where things get changed through time. Like like bits of the story, they have to go back and stitch things together because so and so did something at this point, and you know, and if you watch the films, you're like, does this work chronologically? And it doesn't sort of matter because we allow it to work. And that's exactly what Trump's America is like. It's like we just allow it to work. And I think that form of narrative can only, or that form of writing, that form of storytelling, is so natural to a digital generation that it frustrates me enormously to watch us still making, when we do a proper book, you have to do it as a proper book. Oh, I'm really out of focus. I don't know where my focal point is now. Every now and again I catch myself in the corner of my eye. I can see just like a blurry thing. Anyway, should I stop? I should stop talking, shouldn't I? I should talk.
No, I think I've asked you everything that I wanted to. But yeah, we could talk for hours basically.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I think if people can't find it interesting, I mean, this is the point this year. It's like there is so much that is so fascinating about all of the things that we're going through all of the time. And it is not like, no one says we have to be this thing that just does the thing that we're told. Like, no one says that. We just do it. And it takes, like, radical things have happened to me. I came out as trans. You know, I had to change my entire life. And you know, you realize things that I had pretending to not be autistic for my entire life. And then suddenly being allowed to go, no, that's who you are, and going, oh, that explains so much. And it doesn't mean I wasn't. It means that I think that without those experiences, you can't really understand the degree to which you are restricted. You're more restricted by what society tells you should be than by any travel restrictions, by any lockdown, by anything. Our society's ability to constrain and restrict people, not just in sort of the what clothes they wear or the people they date, but in the way that they think and the way that they think about the future or think about the things in front of them. It's amazingly hard to get people to acknowledge, not that they have to change. I mean, yeah, sure, it's great. Like, and the happier you are, the happier I am for you. But just that it is, that this is all made up. And that's fine, but that's also changeable. It's adaptable. And it's adaptable by the people that choose to adapt it. Anyway. Yes, I must stop talking.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. It's really very interesting always talking to you and listening to what you have to say. And thanks for having the time to being part of Gerety last year. And
it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. I think it's an awesome thing. So yeah, I hope it goes from strength to strength. I think we can't do enough to promote. We can't still do enough, and that's really tragic. We can't do enough to promote female creatives. And it hurts. It's really hard. Like, that's another thing where it's like we have to push and push and push and push and push and push until people genuinely can't understand why we would be pushing anymore. And every time we push, people will go, can you please stop being so pushy? But we have to. We don't have any choice. It's either that or accept our place. And I don't think we should.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Lydia.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon. Take care.
I will. Okay. Bye.